Welcome to another episode of the Bleeding Edge of Digital Health. Exciting guest for you guys here today. We've got Russ Yoshinaka. He's the co-founder and CEO of Ceevra, which is a really exciting FDA-cleared AI-powered 3D modeling and surgical planning software system. Russ, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Mike. Thanks. Glad to be here.
Yeah, appreciate you agreeing to join me. I this is a technology for the audience that I saw out at SRS this year, and we didn't have a chance to meet out there, but found it to be extremely compelling and was excited to have you on the show and be able to spotlight the technology for my guests or for my audience rather. Um, Love to start the show every time by kind of figuring out here or having you tell the audience what was the catalyst for starting the company, and especially given that you did not have a healthcare background prior to jumping into Ceevra, if I'm not mistaken. So I'd love to know what made you decide to join the crazy world of healthcare and what made you decide to start the company.
Yeah, that's right, Mike. I did not have a background in healthcare, and I think had I had a background in healthcare, would I have still done this? Yeah, it would
If
have
you
been a
knew then
closer
what
call.
you know now, right?
Yeah, exactly. The answer is yes. I have. It's been challenging. There's been a lot of the learning curve has been very steep, but I've loved it. It's been the most rewarding experience of my career by far. The genesis of it is started back actually at UCLA. There was a urology surgeon named Joe Shirk, who was a chief resident at UCLA at the time, and he had an opportunity to do a research project. And he does a lot of partial nephrectomy, prostatectomy procedures, so urologic oncology. And he just thought it was crazy that they were still planning these really complex operations using CT scans and MRIs. So he wanted to use 3D digital images to help plan these operations. And he looked around, he surveyed the market, and just couldn't find any applications that would provide what he was looking for in terms of understanding the different structures, being able to interact with them, being able to view them from his phone, things of that nature. So he embarked on a research project where he cobbled together some 3D models using a series of different applications, and then did a small survey or study at UCLA with the urology team there, and saw really significant improvements in patient outcomes when the 3D models were used. And I met him at this time when he just wrapped up this little pilot study, and I was at the time an entrepreneur in residence at UCLA, and I was working with clinicians and grad students who would come up with ideas and were wondering if it's things they could commercialize. So I was advising those people, and I was introduced to Joe. I'd been doing it for about 6 months, and just immediately saw the potential for what he had embarked on, and not only the clinical potential, but how to architect it. So
Mhm.
I came from a background of cloud-based enterprise software, and was as I surveyed the market and understood what was out there, it just occurred to me that no one was taking advantage of all the new technology advancements that were available. And if you did that right, then 3D imaging could go from sort of a niche product, which it was at the time, and it's been around for a while. There's nothing new about 3D imaging, but it's remained a niche product for a lot of different reasons. And I felt, and Ken Koster, who's our CTO and co-founder, felt that if we architected it differently, approached it differently, that this could go from being niche to standard of care. So the three of us, launched the company, and we were off and running.
Yeah, it's a that's a story that I hear often, where founders, timing is everything, right? Like the technology's not good enough to accomplish something until it is, and then when you hit that inflection point where I'm just recalling Canary Medical with Bill Hunter. They started with a sensor that goes into a knee implant to create a smart implant, and they had to start it with the total knee replacement as the application, because that was at the time the smallest that they could make the sensor, and so that was the biggest implant that it could fit into. And now they've got sensors down to millimeters, and there's all kinds of additional applications for it. But once that technology crosses the chasm to where it is viable, then it just takes somebody to have the guts to go and create it. So kudos to you guys. That's really exciting. What's the problem you guys are trying to solve for? What was, you know,
Mhm.
why is it so difficult for physicians to do procedure planning and whatnot with a 2D model?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to that question worth answering. There's the clinical problem, which is, and I think it's well understood at this point, which is that when you're planning a complex surgery using a CT scan or an MRI, they're 2D slices, they're black and white, they're full of noise. The surgeon essentially has to scroll through these scans to try to create the mental 3D reconstruction of the patient's anatomy and
Hmm.
really and try to get a really good understanding of where structures are located and how they are interacting with each other, the relationships between the structures. And surgeons, and there's been studies on this that show that surgeons don't do as good of job as they think they do creating these mental 3D reconstructions. And so what the 3D modeling does is it takes all that guesswork out of the way for them. It actually spoon feeds them an actual 3D reconstruction. It focuses on the anatomical structures that are most important for that particular patient. It allows the surgeons, the way we do it, which is called segmentation, to selectively show and hide individual structures to really focus in on the relationships that are most important for that particular case. And this really does give surgeons a much, much better understanding of where structures are located, what structures are actually even involved, and how best to then go about what's the best type of operation to perform and what's the best way to go about performing it. So that's fundamentally the clinical problem that 3D imaging addresses. I think the other problem that we're addressing is how do you get this into the hands of surgeons in a way that can become part of their everyday practice?
Hmm.
That's the biggest trick. That's the biggest challenge that we found.
Yeah,
How do you how
integrated into the clinical workflow.
integrate it into the clinical workflow? So one thing that we realized early on, and we kind of assumed this going in, is that surgeons, they're so busy. They're
Hmm.
so incredibly busy. And what they want to do is take care of patients. And any sort of administrative burden is just going to go by the wayside. They're just not going to do it. And so we architected the product from day one in a way that would take all of the work away from the surgeons. They don't need to do anything, literally nothing to get a 3D model from us. Their admins are the ones that send us the imaging. So that's really key. The second thing is we make it really, really easy for them to use. They can look at it from their phones, their computers, their tablets. They can look at it in the operating room. So ease of use was really critical. In constructing the UI, again, Ken and I both come from enterprise software backgrounds. So we constructed the user interface, the UXD, in a way that's more akin to a consumer application than a business or a medical application. Again, making it easy, almost fun to use.
Hmm.
We have surgeons who love going to restaurants and just pulling out the 3D model and showing everybody, hey, look at this. It's
Hmm.
de-identified, so they can do that. And then it's easy workflow for the surgeon and then also for the hospital IT departments. So we spent a lot of time focusing on how to make it really, really easy for the hospital IT or the hospitals, I should say, to provide us with the information that we need for the 3D images, which are the CT scans, MRIs, and radiology reports, and making it a very lightweight implementation at the hospital, and then something that they don't need to support on an ongoing basis. So that's the other big piece of the code here is just ease of adoption.
Yeah, and for those that aren't familiar with the alternative, usually it's the night before the physician pulls up the scans after they've seen all their patients. It's late, they're tired, and they go through those scans. And to your point, they're having at that point to kind of plan the procedure 12 hours, 15 hours in advance in their head and look at those scans and then burn that image into their brain and then recall that in the surgical suite, at the table bedside with the patient, and hope that that plan was well architected versus, and I would, for those that haven't seen this technology, I would highly advise that you go on their website and look at it, because it really your website and the videos do a really good job of showing just exactly how usable the technology is. Ease of use is ridiculously easy, but also the ability to, you know, obviously spin the model, the 3D model, but to be able to deselect and select and deselect the different anatomical structures. You know, prostatectomy when they were trying to salvage the nerve bundle, and you know it was a guessing game before technology like this, and now they can see, oh, that, you know, the tumor is 3 millimeters versus 7 millimeters. We might not be able to spare the bundle here. Um, I would think that that would give the physicians a significant greater level of confidence going into the procedure. But I would think it would, there's also a patient component to this where, and maybe this even extends into physician selection, where if they're in, you know, an pre, you know, an initial visit with the physician in their office, and the physician can actually show them, like, here's the tumor, here's where it's at, here's, do you get feedback from the physicians like that, that there's a benefit on the patient side as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We hear that all the time. It's a huge benefit. It's a huge benefit for the patient. It just it makes them feel. It's really hard for the average person to look at a CT scan or an MRI and have any idea what they're looking at.
Yeah.
Even with the surgeon sitting there pointing to this different structures, it's still hard.
Yep.
And so patients, in most of the patients that our surgeons are treating are cancer patients. So they already have really, as you can imagine, really high levels of anxiety, and so do their family members. And when you add to that their inability to really understand what's going on with them, and having to sort of blindly put all their faith in the surgeon, that just adds to the anxiety. And so when a surgeon can sit down with a patient, show them a 3D model, uh, the patients immediately get it. You know,
Yeah.
they can understand exactly what's going on with them. The surgeon can walk them through the thought process of the surgeon regarding how they think that the operation should be performed. And sometimes patients have preconceptions going in as to what they want their surgeon to do, such as in a lung tumor resection. They may come in and say, hey, I want a lung sparing segmentectomy procedure. It's a small nodule. You can do it that way, right? The literature says you should do it that way, right? And the surgeons will sometimes show them, yeah, well, yeah, we can do it exactly. And this is how we're going to do it. Or they may say, you know what, this is in a location where it doesn't make sense to do it that way. We should do a lobectomy. Um, and you're healthy, you can tolerate a lobectomy. So that's my recommendation. Another example is in a prostate case. So you're going to have a lot of men, especially younger men, coming in and saying, hey, doc, I need you to spare the nerve bundles.
Yep.
Got a long life ahead of me, and I want to preserve intimacy, my ability to be intimate. And a lot of times the surgeon will look at our models and say, yeah, I think we can do that. But there are some times when they'll look at the models and say, no, okay, we can do that, but there's a pretty high risk that we're going to leave some cancer behind. And so these are the types of open conversations that the surgeon can have with a patient that you just can't have without the 3D model.
Yeah.
And then lastly, I would say that we are in as it relates to patient counseling and some of the benefits to the hospital, to the health system, is in competitive markets like Florida and New York, you have patients who will visit multiple surgeons before they decide who they're going to choose for that operation.
100%.
Yeah, and we have found that if one of our surgeon users has a patient like that come in, and our customer is able to show the patient their 3D model and walk them through that, they invariably end up getting that patient and doing the operation for them.
Yeah, it's a total differentiator. One, it one, there's probably a conscious component to it of this doctor is more technologically advanced.
Yep.
There's a subconscious component to it where that patient's going to be drawn to the individual that made them feel more at ease.
Agree
And
with that.
they probably don't, you know, they probably aren't aware that they're even making that decision for that reason. But we all, I mean, anytime you feel more comfortable around a doctor, you're going to gravitate towards that individual.
Yep, no
So it
question.
makes perfectly good sense. So how does this work from a viewing perspective? Um, Obviously, they can view it on their iPhone or iPad. I'm guessing they can view it through an AR, VR headset. But how does it work? Do you have it set up so that it can register directly through the surgical robotic platforms yet? If not, is that coming?
Yeah, so this is an area that's evolved for us. When the company was started, we were mobile viewing only. So
Hmm.
we were not only mobile first, we were mobile only. And it's partly because we wanted to really differentiate from the legacy desktop on-premise software applications that were out there.
So this is
And
all cloud native.
yeah, so this is all cloud. So that's one of the things again that Ken and I brought to bear with this company is when we set about building the company. I'll go off on a little bit of a tangent here. We said this needs to be cloud for this to scale, for this to ultimately scale, and there's a lot of components that go into scaling. This needs to be cloud native. And people said, "Oh, well, this was a few years ago," and people said, "Well, gosh, hospitals, they're not going to let you put patient information in the cloud." And we said, well, we'll find out because we don't think that there's any other way to make this big unless we do it that way. So it was kind of go big or go home. So we early on, we knew this was going to be an area of focus for the hospitals. And so we built out a really robust information security program, a lot of documentation around it. And sure enough, we were able to get hospitals comfortable with allowing us to take in information into our cloud. And that's become really critical for us as we
Yep.
go forward, not only from in many respects. So if one because we are everything's in the cloud, we are really able to take advantage of both of cloud computing power, cloud computing economics, and more we are doing real AI. We're using machine learning technology to generate the 3D models. And I think that would be very, very difficult, if not impossible, if we didn't have a cloud-based architecture. The
Hmm.
other really key component of our cloud-based architecture is it allows us to easily integrate with any system in the OR. So we can, you just bringing in a computer or a phone, or we can even potentially integrate directly onto a system. We can integrate with any robotic surgery platform in the OR, any ablative system. Our 3D models can be viewed from any monitor. So presently, what surgeons will do today is they'll bring their phones into the OR because most of the surgeons that we're working with are robotic surgeons. They can either just have the phone right next to them during the procedure because they're not scrubbed in and they can look at the model on their phone, or they can plug that phone very easily with two off-the-shelf adapters into the back of the robotic console. So today, it's primarily the Da Vinci console. So we do have a number of surgeons who are looking at the 3D models during operations in the robotic console using TilePro. And then as more and more robotic systems come to market, we'll do the same thing with them, whether it's a head-in display or a heads-up display.
Yeah. No, it's incredible. What um do you have anybody using this in open procedures?
Not a ton. We do have some gynecology surgeons, benign, who are doing very complex fibroid removal procedures.
Hmm.
And sometimes those need to be planned as open procedures just because of the size and number of the fibroids.
Yeah.
In our application, it doesn't really matter if it's a robotic procedure, laparoscopic, or open. It's helpful from a planning standpoint for all of those types of procedures.
And is there an accommodation in the software or the AI? I'm just thinking, the patient was in a certain position when they had their CT or their MRI, and then they're in a different position. The internal organs shift when they're on the table. Is there an accommodation needed there, or is it usually just a measurement, a certain reference point from anatomical structures that they know we just have to go? Because I know with some of the ablation, some of the interventional surgical planning technologies that I've come across, um, there has to be an accommodation for the shifting of the structures. Um, but with this, I'm thinking it might just be as simple as a certain distance from a landmark or whatever in the package, the software program.
Yeah, so the issue you're describing is not really a challenge in our procedures. We have found that there's really not much discordance between the structure layout and the 3D models and what the surgeons are seeing during the operation from a positioning standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
The one exception to that that does come up fairly frequently is in the lung cancer procedures. So the lung cancer scans are taken from an inflated lung, yep, and then during the procedure, it's deflated. And this is a topic that we've had a number of conversations with lung surgeons about. And the net is that the there's two pieces to this. First, that they're using it to understand where is the nodule located relative to segmental boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
What segment is it in? And if I take that segment, can I get an adequate margin? And that decision process really isn't impacted by this inflation deflation phenomenon. The other thing that we consistently hear is that the bronchovascular anatomy, that really doesn't change much from a perspective standpoint between inflated and deflated. So, so from that perspective, and again, when they're doing these procedures, what they want to understand before they go in is where are the key branches? Those become their landmarks, and they're looking for those as they go in. And as long as they continue to see them in a pattern that's consistent with what they were expecting in the 3D model, which they consistently do, then it's not an issue.
Yeah. Yeah. What where is it at commercially? Are you guys you're actively selling in the market at this point?
We have, I won't give specific numbers, but we have many very good customers in the United States, including
Mm-hmm.
many academic medical centers. Two of the largest, two of the top 10 IDNs are customers of ours.
It's great.
Thank you. Yeah. And we just got clearance in Europe under MDR in late May. And so we are in process of expanding our footprint into Europe as well.
And what was the clinical burden to get this across the finish line? I know a lot of these artificial intelligence, machine learning technologies, the FDA's building the plane as they're flying it, much the same as the founders are with these technologies. What was the experience like there? What was the pathway to getting approval?
Yeah. So our original clearance was with the FDA. It was under 510(k), and we just needed to show substantial equivalence. So there was no clinical study, no clinical data that was required for that. And we got a broad clearance. So with that clearance, we were now able to generate 3D imaging for any type of surgery. Fast forward a few years, we had now amassed enough data through our operations to do some meaningful machine learning development and develop machine learning algorithms that are now used to generate the 3D models. Now, once you get into machine learning, you're in a whole new category with the FDA.
Mm-hmm.
They consider that to be AI. They don't necessarily consider non-ML computer vision to be AI, but anything that's
Mm-hmm.
machine learning based, black boxy, they say, okay, this is now AI, and they will do a really rigorous examination of how you developed it, um, how did you train the models, how did you test the models, how did you do your ground truthing, what were the qualifications of your ground truthers, and they do this on an anatomical structure by structure basis. So when we got into that process with them a few years ago, we decided we were going to focus on prostate cancer, kidney cancer, lung cancer. Those are our three main indications to date. And so we got into this process with them, and we're actually quite surprised how sophisticated the FDA was on this topic. And we generally felt, sometimes we felt that some of the things that they were requesting were a bit out of out of scope, I should say.
Yeah.
Um, but generally speaking, they took a very collaborative approach, and we spent a lot of time working with them on all the topics that we just discussed. Also type of what are the performance metrics you're going to need to hit, and what are the thresholds for those, and and uh, and got through that process with them last year. So we got clearance essentially for using ML for kidney cancer models, prostate cancer models, and lung cancer models. And we were the first company to get that type of clearance for surgical planning in urology and thoracic. And so that was a real tremendous effort by our engineering team to get through that process. And then so again, no clinical data required with the FDA because it's under 510(k), but it was really a deep dive into the technology. And then with when we expanded into Europe, that was a whole different ball of wax. So now all of a sudden, and we didn't realize this, they are now going to require clinical data. And fortunately, we have done two multi-site randomized controlled trials, prospective randomized controlled trials, which I think is somewhat unique for a software company, especially one our
Very
size.
much so.
Yeah, and I give all the credit to our co-founder Joe Shirk on that. That's something that he said early on. Hey guys, we need to do this. Little did we know that we would ever need it for EU MDR, but he said we're going to need this for a variety of reasons. So we have some really good published clinical data on outcomes improvements in partial nephrectomy and prostatectomy, and I think those were really helpful in our MDR process.
Yeah, it's great. I love the technology. I mean, you guys are extremely well positioned. The soft tissue surgical robotic space is blowing up. Number of procedures are growing significantly. You guys are extremely well positioned, and surgical planning is an area that I think is going to continue to see a market increase in the market, moving forward. So you guys are in a great space, and I love the technology, man. I want to get you out of here on time. Thank you again for taking the time to chat about this today. Definitely look forward to watching you guys grow in the future, and at some point maybe we'll get you back on for a follow-on show to catch up and see where you guys are at.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks a lot, Mike. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. That's it for this edition of the Bleeding Edge of Digital Health. We'll catch you on the next episode.